All right, let's jump straight into it. Today we're doing a full, deconstructive literary critique on a truly monumental anthology, Videha 21. This isn't just a simple book review. We're going to break down the incredibly complex and honestly, sometimes totally contradictory themes that beat at the very heart of modern Maithili literature.
Now, a crucial point right off the bat. We're not here to just summarize plots. That's surface-level stuff. What we really want to know is, what actually lies beneath that surface? When you gather hundreds of pages of prose, poetry, and editorial notes from a specific linguistic community, you don't just get a collection of words, right? You get this incredibly clear mirror reflecting deep cultural anxieties, shifting power dynamics, and societal fractures. So, let's peel back those layers together.
Our source material for this explainer, Videha 21, isn't just a printed book. It's actually an extension of the Videha e-journal edited by Gajendra Thakur, making it a vital digital artifact. It represents a massive, grassroots effort to preserve the ancient Maithili language, which obviously has incredibly deep historical roots, and propel it right into the modern digital era. It's essentially an archive of survival.
Okay, let's hit Section 1, Tradition versus Modernity.
If you deconstruct almost any piece of modern post-colonial literature, you're going to find an intense generational clash. You can really see this playing out in the story Dwanva, which translates to conflict. We hear the familiar voice of the parent pushing the traditional narrative. Study hard, become an officer, elevate the family's prestige. But colliding right into that is the youth's rebellion. They're crying out that they have zero freedom to pursue what they actually love, like cricket or dance. It perfectly captures how these parental expectations are essentially suffocating individual desires, basically turning family honor into a cage.
Moving right along to Section 2, Deconstructing Gender Perspectives.
We really need to analyze how the male and female gazes subvert, and sometimes stubbornly uphold, societal rules within this text. Throughout the essays and stories, there's this constant, heavy push and pull. You have the historical burden placed on women, that traditional submissiveness expected to maintain household honor. But slamming head-on into that is the modern reality of female financial independence and a fierce desire for personal agency. The literature is actively trying to process this messy transition.
To really grasp this, take this story, Dosar Bea, or Second Marriage. It's a fascinating mini-narrative. We've got a couple who had a modern love marriage, completely breaking traditional boundaries. The wife is financially independent, working as a bank clerk. But here's where the deconstruction kicks in. Her financial independence directly threatens her husband's deep-rooted patriarchal ego. He gets paranoid, jealous, and super controlling. The story doesn't blame the modern woman at all. Instead, it critiques the fragile traditional male ego that simply cannot handle a woman with her own agency, which inevitably leads to the collapse of their relationship.
But, escaping the past isn't exactly easy. The volume frequently pulls from legendary Maithili poets like Vidyapati. The quote, "All daughters go to their in-laws," echoes heavily through these pages. It shows how historical female subtext, this ingrained idea that a woman's ultimate destination is always someone else's home, still deeply influences and honestly kind of haunts the modern Maithili woman's identity. The past is always whispering to the present.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, The Paradox of Mortality.
This is perhaps the most profound philosophical binary in the entire collection. I really want you to absorb this concept from the story Jushin, which means celebration. We are brought into the room of a father dying of cancer, his family weeping all around him. But the father looks at the insects gathering around a light bulb and delivers this emotionally shattering line. He points out that those insects will definitively die by the new moon, yet they are dancing, they're celebrating their brief existence. And he asks his family, "Why are you crying for me?"
It just beautifully deconstructs our human anxiety. Think about our reality. We're so often paralyzed by the fear and grief of our inevitable mortality, but then nature offers an entirely different philosophy, a joyous celebration of a fleeting, temporary life. The author is practically forcing us to confront why we mourn the inevitable, while the smallest creatures inherently know how to celebrate the present moment. It's an absolutely stunning piece of existential critique.
Now, Section 4, Subverting Literary Elitism.
Let's step outside the fiction for a second and look at the real-world literary landscape. The anthology's editorial notes offer this powerful deconstruction of the tension between the literary elite and grassroots realities. Let's track the journey of Dalit poet Umesh Paswan. He published his poetry collection, Varnat Ras, in 2012, but it actually took until 2018 for the literary establishment to finally recognize him with the prestigious Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar. The editor explicitly calls this out as a moment where the advisory committee finally stepped outside its narrow-mindedness. So, why does this delayed recognition matter to our critique? Because celebrating this award signifies a massive shift toward inclusivity. It's an active subversion of the establishment. By amplifying marginalized Dalit voices, the anthology is literally redefining what constitutes valuable Maithili literature. It breaks down those historical, institutional barriers that used to dictate that only upper caste, high narratives were worthy of recognition. It fundamentally changes who gets to tell the story of this community.
And finally, Section 5, the fractured Maithili identity.
We've looked at generational conflict, gender dynamics, existential philosophy, and literary politics. When you pull all these deconstructed themes together, what's the overarching narrative? At its core, this literature is built on intense binaries. We've got tradition versus youth, male expectations against female independence, grief versus celebration, and elite gatekeepers battling grassroots truth. These binaries paint a vivid picture of a fractured identity. This is a culture in deep, deep transition, caught securely between ancient, revered roots and a rapidly shifting, unforgiving modern world.
Which leads me to a final question for you. Does this literature actually resolve these cultural binaries, or does it simply hold up a mirror to our fractured reality? I'd argue the true power of Videha 21 is that it purposefully doesn't offer easy answers. It forces you to just sit with the discomfort of the conflict. I want to leave you with that provocative thought to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the text you read. Catch you next time.